public hearing, so, with that.
At this time, all school districts just have a public hearing before we enter contract negotiations, so it's just something required by law, so it's an opportunity there for anyone to speak just before we enter negotiations. So if anyone would like to share any comments, they're more than welcome. It's something that's just been done, I believe, the last 2 or 3 years, kind of a new part of negotiations, but we will begin negotiations next week. Legally, across the state, they start September 15th. We've got some meetings scheduled, so then we'll get back and we'll have the board ratify the agreement. No comments? Okay. We'll post this hearing for the contract negotiations per Indiana code. Just go ahead and open the public hearing for the budget hearing, which is an opportunity for the public or anyone to come and share. It had an opportunity, we did advertise the public hearing in the newspaper, and the advertisement of a public or a budget is merely the request, and it's basically the approval to spend that much money. So we would advertise the budget. That's what we did in the newspaper, and then we have our public hearings. Once we would have our public hearing, and then we will come back and the board will approve the budget. And that's just approval to spend up to that amount of money. Once the board approves it, it goes to the Department of Local Government Finance. The Department of Local Government Finance reviews that budget, and then they send all taxing units a 1782 notice. And that 1782 notice is what actually gives us permission, and it will have a dollar amount in each of those line items, that this is what you can spend in the rainy day fund, in the education fund, operations fund, and those funds. If we were to have to spend over that amount, we would have to go back through the public hearing process and ask for an additional appropriation and advertise in the newspaper and that. So anytime any school district or any taxing unit, you always estimate those expenses higher because you really don't want to have to go through that process. And if you noticed in the budget that we've advertised in every year, and in fact before I even started here, the number that was always advertised in the rainy day fund was 2.5 million. The last 2 years, we've advertised that amount in the newspaper, but we haven't spent any money in the rainy day fund. But obviously, a school district our size, you never know as far as an emergency or something could happen. The nice thing is you don't have to go back through that process. One thing that we did find, and we've noticed, and you can see, and if you can reference this, I know Robin Mooter has done a very nice job in our business office, and so I've met obviously with Dr. Harmon, who's helped us as well as a consultant. If you see, this in parentheses is just the amount that we've advertised over here in our different funds. And I can slide that down in just a second. If you look at the one rainy day expenditure, when I looked back the last 3 years, that was an expenditure because we were self-funded in an insurance, and we were really having hard times back in 18 and 19, and we had some really large, high cost. And in fact, we ended up having to put about $1.1 million. So if you remember, I mean, we went through the process,
and we joined the Health Insurance Trust, and now we're with 12 other school districts, the Southern Wellness Trust. And it has proved to do much better for North Lawrence the last 3 years. Last year we did, obviously with COVID, we had an increase, but most importantly, you can see the last 2 years we haven't had to spend expenditures. And honestly, this 4,500 is probably something that we went back and looked, and I think Janice Roan spent some of that. And if you remember, we had built a building out of the FFA, and we were gonna pay for half of it, and FFA was, she ended up just paying it out of the rainy day fund. But for the most part, we haven't had to touch our rainy day fund, which is new. I think historically, the rainy day fund, a lot, was used somewhat to keep the school system kind of going and balanced. And then what they would do is not spend as much money in operations, and then at the end of the year, they would replenish the rainy day fund. But what happens, you can sometimes do that for a year or two, but then over time, you have lots of facility needs that we probably just didn't keep up in using those operations funds the way we should have. If you go down to the operations, you can see here, this is our revenue. So if you look out here, you can see what we advertise. So we advertise 15.8 and 15.5. And this is the money that we actually ended up bringing in a revenue. Here, we did go over just a little bit, but actually, we ended up getting it back because with some of the ESSER funds, we pay something out and then we get reimbursed. But you can see this is pretty close. Now, some of our operations, if you look at that, we've stayed consistent. But the one thing that has definitely changed in operations, one, we're using operations funds the way they should be used. One large expense that previously the school buses were really not on a rotation as far as replacing the buses, but we did spend $550,000 when we purchased some buses. We bought some 2-year-old buses from Warwick County. So there were some large expenditures here that were attributed to assets and things that we truly needed. The other thing is, you've heard us talk about, and when they went away from the general fund, and obviously we had the transportation fund and the capital projects fund and all those different funds. When we went away from those funds, and that was done in 19, we knew, and they wanted everything to be education fund and operations. They knew a school district would need some of the state money, which is the education money, to go towards operations. The schools just wouldn't have enough. And ideally, that amount should probably be in that 12 to 15% range. And that's where we, North Lawrence, was right up close to 22%. We were spending over that amount. So when we were getting state education funds, we were transferring right at 21%, 21.8% into operations. That was hurting our ability to pay salaries and benefits to our teachers. And that was a big concern of ours, that we had to reduce our operation expenses. I can tell you we've reduced it, because the amount going from 21% to 15% where we are this year is $2.2 million. So even with these expenditures that we have in operations, we are no longer paying for these types of things out of the education fund. We have moved those up to operations where they should be. So even with that expenditures, that is the dollar amount. And probably when we estimate it, it could even be higher than that. But when we go back and look with Dr. Harmon and when Robin and I spent time together, we agreed at least $2.2 million as a conservative number has now moved up into operations expenses. And I think, I was gonna slide this down.
Hit the arrow.
Arrow, okay. Oh, no.
it's like, it's just,
It is.
versus education plus 17% operations. It's at the bottom of the slide.
Oh, it's just.
Or is that the whole?
That's the whole
That's it,
slide.
we can-
Yeah.
It's a, that, it just moved it over to the left on the bottom. 17% operations is moved to the left.
Okay. Oh, that's all. I thought this, okay, I see it now. Here's my next section. That threw me off there. Here's our education as far as the education fund. And you can see this is the revenue. And our revenue has decreased from the state. In 2019 or 20, we had 34.5 million. And then in 21, we had 30,570,000. So we've had a decrease, and I think we'll be able to see, you know, we've had that. Now, that isn't just student enrollment. I mean, yes, the biggest number is ADM, but we also have a reduced number in Title I. That also, if we don't have as many students, we don't get as much money in special ed. We also don't get, you know, as much money in the high ability and a lot of the other categories. So that's why that number ends up being a little bit more than we would see on our regular ADM tuition fund. But you can see, even with what we've added and what we've provided, the different, you know, as far as salary and benefits, we've worked hard in the education fund as far as our bus drivers, our substitutes, our support staff, and even the last 2 years, if we look historically, the last 2 years, the amount of money that we have funded with our teachers' contract has been greater than it was the previous 3+ years. I'm not going to show you all the exact numbers, but Lacey's here, and we would both definitely agree that even as this has decreased, we've been able to give the teachers more the last 2 years than they were previously getting. So we're living within our means. We're doing what we need to be doing, and we're right-sizing the school district. So as we look at that. Now, you asked the question, and I agree, I was a little bit baffled a little bit when we went back and looked at our actual revenue and our actual expenses. I'm like, what's going on? Because we advertised 28.9 million, but I was spending more. And here I advertised 28.5 and we were spending more. But this is the education money plus the expenditures that we were spending up here in operations, okay? And we could take the time, we didn't have a lot of that identified out. One of the things that we're going to do this next year, which has not been done since they set up the accounts in 2019, we're actually going to take our operations funds and divide some of that out and have an area for transportation and have a different area of operation. So we'll be able to break that out a little bit more, but historically they didn't. But in case you're wondering, how are we spending more than we were advertising? That's what it is. Last year's advertisement, and I know some of you received some emails, it was high. And I really think what happened as we looked at the numbers and different things, we had this number, but I think Janice was looking at this rainy day fund, and that number was inflated. So when we pulled it down, we've advertised more in line where the numbers should be, as our expenditures have dropped. So, I think overall, you know, typically a school district, it's very, our public budget is a little more unique than other cities and towns and other public funds, the library, because a school budget encompasses the calendar year. But our expenses, and a lot of things change because one budget encompasses January to May of one school year, and then August to December of another school year. And you have retirees, you have different projects, different things going on. So it makes it a little more challenging, whereas a lot of places of employment that are public entities employ their employees year-round, and there isn't a lot of change. So that's one thing. But, you know, North Lawrence addressed a lot of the concerns. And we went through and we looked at different things to reduce our operations cost. And we also looked at, obviously, as we lost funding and revenue, looked at ways that we could reduce these expenses. And we made those adjustments in year one. And then in year two, you accrue some of those savings throughout the course of the year. They don't all happen overnight. They all didn't happen over the next day. But over the course of time, it was electric bills we weren't paying. It was floors we weren't waxing. It was, you know, health insurance we weren't paying. It was, you know, facilities or updates or roofs and things like that. But then we accrue the savings. And the good part is, now is the time that we can start to redistribute those savings. So I do feel, as we enter negotiations, just like the last 2 years, we've been able to do more than North Lawrence Schools has been able to do previously, and I don't see that changing. I think that we are definitely financially, we've been able to keep the balances we've had, and I think one thing that I can also share, we've been able to really do some things within our budget and even flex our wings a little bit. This early learning center, it wasn't there before. We've done that within our budget. We're gonna have our open house on October 22nd. That is something that didn't exist, but we've been able to do that with our budget. Gateway Academy didn't exist before, but we've been able to do that even within our budget. And we're graduating 20 to 25 seniors a year. And we've increased the graduation rate at the high school. And I know even a lot with robotics and other different things that Maggie has implemented in a lot of our schools, and even professional development in everything we've done, we've been able to do it within our budget. So, any questions? It's not easy, and it's kind of moving. And two, it's hard, we really can't go back any more than this historically, as much as I'd love to. The problem is, before this, everything was different funds. You know, we paid everything out of the general fund, and then you had your transportation fund, your debt service fund, your capital projects fund, but they changed all that. So it's hard to go back and look more historically than this. We went back as, you know, what we can.
You
So.
keep saying they, you're talking about the state.
The state,
Yeah.
yes, that's correct, the state.
So the bottom line is, our income has come down, we're getting less money, but we've been able to make the cuts needed to have additional revenue to offer our teachers and staff more revenue, more raises in the next upcoming negotiation.
Yeah.
And maintain the projects and other things we need the day-to-day.
That we have. And I think it's been important, even the last 2 years, we were able to do more. It's not like we haven't done anything the last 2 years. with our support staff or the teachers, we've done more the last 2 years, but recognizing we still need to do more. And we know we're not there, but, and we're continuing to work. But much of what we have set out to do is coming, and it is there. And I think now is the opportunity that we have those savings. Now we have the ability to start redistributing them.
So is 2.2 million the amount at play?
I could hear, but.
So my mic's not.
No.
Is the 2.2 million what's at play to increase the raises? Or I'm trying to figure out how much savings we have to be able to, I mean, we're talking about savings, but is there a number, is it 2.2 million? Because that's how I'm.
No,
Because that's how I'm
I
interpreting.
think a lot of that are count days tomorrow, Wendy.
Okay,
And once we get the count day, and once I get the 1782, and I know how much money we're getting, tomorrow's a big day. And I think that will start to determine a little bit
what's really
what we're
going
at.
on. Okay.
Yeah. And I think as we go through the negotiations, that's part, even both sides start to look at those things.